Evening. I'm your host, Karen Hudis, in this series on the network of global corporate control. We're coming to you live from DCTV studios. Today's segment is dedicated to John and Robert Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, Ferdinand Marcos, and most of all to Jose Rizal. We're embarking on a global currency reset, thanks to the groundwork laid by the Kennedy brothers, Reagan, Marcos, and Rizal, in fighting the network of global corporate control. The first half of the program will look at the platform laid out for us. The second half will tell you what we're doing with this platform that we've inherited. The platform is the world's gold and other wealth in the global debt facility that is managed by the Board of Governors of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. The network of global corporate control was described by three mathematicians at the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, Switzerland, as a mega conglomerate of the 43,000 transnational companies on the world's capital markets, and it owns 40% of the assets and 60% of the earnings of these companies by interlocking directors on their boards of directors. In February, in the segment called World Bank Whistleblower for Dummies, we described the world's first corporations created in 1602, the British East India Company and the Dutch East India Company. Robert Kennedy said, "A revolution is coming, a revolution which will be peaceful if we are wise enough, compassionate if we care enough, successful if we are fortunate enough, but a revolution which is coming whether we will it or not. We can affect its character. We cannot alter its inevitability." Let's start out talking about Jose Rizal. In earlier programs, we learned how Jose Rizal, one of the greatest minds of the 19th century, an author, ophthalmologist, sculptor, linguist, who spoke 22 languages, and visionary who wrote about events in his life years before they actually occurred, liberated the Philippines from Spanish colonial rule, miraculously survived a firing squad, and went to Rome as Father Jose Antonio Diaz de la Paz, eventually becoming the Superior General of the Society of Jesus at the end of World War II. It was Jose Rizal who gathered the Treaty of Versailles bonds that were issued in the 1930s and exchanged for gold that are now worth more than $2 quadrillion with accrued compound interest. These bonds cancel all of the country indebtedness in the world, and what that means for people is they're paying interest on that debt. They're working 3 months out of the year. On December 10th, 2014, the Federal Reserve tried to buy back these Treaty of Versailles bonds. And I said, because I was the one who was supposed to be approving this on behalf of the Board of Governors, I said, these assets of the global debt facility cannot be alienated by Wolfgang Struck, that means they can't be sold, or Reverend Floro Garcia, or any of the others who claim that they possess signature authority for the global debt facility, unless the transaction has been authenticated by the Bretton Woods institutions. That means the World Bank and IMF, and that this is required by paragraph 6 in a bilateral Minesfield Breakthrough Successor Agreement. That's a treaty that was signed also by General Eisenhower and President Truman at the time and the other leaders of the world. As you may recall, I have previously turned down each proposal for the sale of these certificates at a steep discount. This is because the network of global corporate control identified by three mathematicians, Vitali, Glatfelder, and Battiston of ETH Zurich, is insolvent and is going to be wound down. Let's talk about Ferdinand Marcos. Marcos was the lawyer for Jose Rizal. It was Marcos who put the world's monetary gold reserves, other precious metals, gemstones, and art in trust for 50 years, and the ones who inherit this wealth, that's all of humanity. Ferdinand Marcos is a great hero. He turned down an offer by the Trilateral Commission in order to preserve the trust for humanity containing the world's assets. Ferdinand Marcos was overthrown by the CIA. Eric San Juan, a prominent journalist, originally published this story in 1998. San Juan was friends with James Brandon Foley, a CIA agent in the U.S. Embassy in 1986, when the EDSA revolution overthrew Ferdinand Marcos. EDSA is named for Epifanio de los Santos Avenue, the street of the CIA and Vatican-engineered demonstrations against Ferdinand Marcos. The story also includes how Ted Koppel and Newsweek tried to destabilize Ferdinand Marcos, how the mainstream media ran stories blackmailing the Marcoses, and promises of immigration to the U.S. for striking workers and renegade generals. Last week there was a story in The Guardian accusing Marcos of corruption, and I commented that the Philippines Presidential Commission on Good Governance, it's simply an arm of the network of global corporate control, and that arm is trying to steal the world's assets from the world's people. And we have been foiling that attempt many times. We talked about how the CIA is not working for the security interests of the United States, or it's not even headquartered in Langley, Virginia. This is what we mentioned in our segment on Switzerland. The Central Intelligence Agency is located in Switzerland, which is the center of Europe. The CIA's office in Langley, Virginia is simply a branch. And the Guardian newspaper is owned by the network of global corporate control. It keeps on trying to fool the people. That attempt is no longer working, as only 6% of the people trust the mainstream media anymore. Let's turn to John F. Kennedy now. In 1961, in a speech for the American Newspaper Publishers Association, JFK stated his opposition to, quote, secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. He also stated his opposition to the network of global corporate control, which he described as a, quote, ruthless conspiracy, a highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations, close quote. John Kennedy accessed the U.S. monetary gold in the global debt facility. On June 4, 1963, JFK signed Executive Order, and that's 11110, into law. This gave the President the right to issue gold-backed currency without permission from the Federal Reserve. On the 14th of November 1963, Kennedy signed the Green-Hilton Agreement, which accessed the U.S. monetary gold reserves in the global debt facility. The Green-Hilton Agreement would have ended the unconstitutional Federal Reserve notes. 8 days later, JFK was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. Now let's turn to JFK's brother, Robert Kennedy. The Kennedy brothers had a very close working relationship. In 1952, Robert directed his older brother's upset victory over Henry Cabot Lodge in the Massachusetts senatorial contest. From 1956 to 1959, Robert F. Kennedy challenged labor racketeering as chief counsel to Senator McClellan's United States Senate Select Committee on Improper Activities in the Labor and Management field. RFK published the findings about Jimmy Hoffa's Teamsters Union in a book called The Enemy Within. RFK became Attorney General in 1960 when JFK became president. Robert Kennedy was the U.S. Senator from New York between 1965 and 68. In the Senate, RFK opposed escalation of the Vietnam War. On the 5th of June 1968, just after his victory in the presidential primary race over Eugene McCarthy, the CIA killed RFK. RFK was 42 at the time and had left 11 children. Now let's turn to Ronald Reagan. Ferdinand Marcos and Ronald Reagan were friends. Wolfgang Struck told me that it was Marcos who financed Ronald Reagan's presidential campaign. This is the third time that we have discussed a clip in which Ferdinand Marcos was praying to the United States. It was a speech during a state visit to Ronald Reagan in Washington. And he said, "For I know that as I have said in many a speech before my own people and before the world, fate and destiny have decreed that the United States of America be the trustee of modern civilization against the threat of a possible second Dark Ages, and America cannot fail. Therefore," and this is what Ferdinand Marcos said, "we, the Filipino people, come and bring you a prayer. God, in His divine providence, may grant you guidance and strengthen both your heart and hand, so that hand may be strong on the lever of power and save our humanity. If America fails, then the world is lost." That was the end of that statement of Ferdinand Marcos. Ronald Reagan appointed the Grace Commission to find out where the United States income taxes went. The Grace Commission found that money from income taxes is all leaving the United States to pay interest on that scam called country debt. And somebody wrote to a comment section asking me, well, if the income taxes are not paying for the expenditures of the federal government, what is? It's a very sad story where our money is coming from. It's coming from drug trade. It's coming from human trafficking. It's coming from money laundering. That network of global corporate control is using all kinds of crime to pay what it otherwise is stealing from the United States in our taxes. Let's talk about paper money. When a country's treasury issues currency, the difference between what it costs for the treasury to print the bills and the face amount of the bill, that is called seigniorage. It stays with the country, and there is no bogus scam called interest on country debt. Ronald Reagan printed treasury dollars and was going to get the Federal Reserve out of charging American taxpayers interest on seigniorage. Those uncut treasury dollars, which Ronald Reagan printed, are on deposit with Union Bank of Switzerland in Switzerland. And I'd like to show a graph which will illustrate how much money the United Kingdom has had to borrow when it borrows its currency from the private central bank called the Bank of England and allows the Bank of England to keep its seigniorage and charge interest on it. Ferdinand Marcos put the toxic power of compounding interest on seigniorage to use in fighting the network of global corporate control. The Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF agreed a year ago that the network of global corporate control was in receivership in the Global Debt Facility, which is holding $260 trillion of Treaty of Versailles bonds, which were issued in the 1930s. And since the 1930s, there has been interest which has been compounding on these bonds. The Fed now owes over $2 quadrillion to the beneficiaries of the Global Debt Facility. The beneficiaries, that's us. And we are using these bonds to offset country debt. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. During the spring meetings of the World Bank and IMF, I spoke with a member of the Greek delegation about this scam called country debt. Greece's former Minister of Finance, Yanis Varoufakis, made the point that Greece could not just keep on adding to its country debt when he was interviewed by Noam Chomsky at the New York Public Library on April 26. This idea that you can just allow country debt to skyrocket, this is an invention by the network of global corporate control, which is trying to put the world back into another dark ages. We described how Moscow State University started a new discipline of chronologia, which shows the systematic falsification of ancient history. It was in the 1600s, right around the time that the East and West India companies came into being, that this falsification began. I work with whistleblowers in the World Bank, and after I started accessing the social media in 2013, I'm working with all of the whistleblowers of the world to find out about the hidden reality. Our track record helps show the truth. In a segment which I'm taping tonight after this live segment, I'm going to be moderating the interviews that I did this weekend with Betsy Banfield Malone and Nick Blaine. Betsy has been writing the Secure News TV blog, and Nick was the one who told me about the discipline of chronologia. And let's talk now about what we together want to do now that we understand that the network of global corporate control has been creating a false reality that we can see through. I'm frequently asked, when is the global currency reset going to start? And one of the people writing comments asked me to make the explanations simple so that people can understand what's going on. So let me tell you where we are. At the end of the spring meetings, the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF approved the minutes on the global currency reset. The challenge was to get through to the United States so that the people in the United States understand. First of all, that the network of global corporate control replaced the Constitution of 1789. That General Dunford is heading a martial law regime. The Constitution of 1789 is not in effect. And the U.S. Congress has kept this martial law in place by extending a state of emergency. They do this secretly behind closed doors. Now that we know this unacceptable state of affairs is over. We are not headed by a government that General Dunford is making decisions for us. It's just not happening anymore. I sent a letter to the 50 governors and their adjutants general, and I asked them to correct me if I was wrong in saying that the United States was under martial law and that General Dunford thought he was in charge of civilian rule. Not a single adjutant general or governor was willing to contradict this statement. And so I repeated on my social media, martial law has no legitimacy. I also tweeted to President Barack Obama about this martial law because he's just sitting there like what would we call him? He's a puppet. He's not making decisions. These decisions are taken by General Dunford, and General Dunford, as a Knight of Malta, is simply taking dictation from the network of global corporate control. The fact that President Obama nominated Judge Merrick Garland was a very poor choice because it was Merrick Garland who was on the 3-judge panel in the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals that ignored the settlement of my case by 188 ministers of finance on the Board of Governors of the World Bank. And that panel refused to acknowledge that the federal judiciary are not sitting in Article 3 courts under the Constitution of 1789. It's a masquerade. Justice Anton Scalia met with an untimely death when he was on record supporting an Article 5 convention to limit the federal government's usurpation of power. So I contacted Maryland's Adjutant General and Maryland's Governor and Maryland's Secretary of State with a copy to the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF. And you can see in the teleprompter the text. I'm just going to paraphrase it. This is in follow-up to my letters to the 50 governors and their adjutants general. During the global currency reset and until further notice, the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF have authorized me to speak on their behalf unless they rescind my instructions in writing. The second secret Constitution of the United States of 1871 is illegitimate, has no validity, and is hereby suspended. During this interregnum, and until the Constitution of 1789 goes back into effect, I exercise the voice and vote of the United States on the Board of Governors and the boards of executive directors of the World Bank and IMF. The global debt facility containing the U.S. monetary gold reserves is making sure that the United States currency continues to support economic activity. I've explained to Major General Singh's office, that's Maryland's Adjutant General, that the global debt facility's liens in Maryland are to be recorded against payment of the tax for the assessed value of the property on which the lien is recorded. Let me explain what this is about. This is about the chief of police in the District of Columbia that has been preventing me illegally from going back to my desk at the World Bank. And her house, we've got a lien on that. Either I go back into the World Bank or the global debt facility is taking her house. There's a lot going on during the global currency reset, and I'm grateful to Carmen Stanley, Mo Jackson, Mark Wesley, and the rest of the crew at DCTV for helping to keep everyone informed. The archives on YouTube contain a lot of information in the comments section. I will discuss some of the issues raised if time allows, and yes it does, we've got 5 minutes. So let me start out first by saying one of the tweets that I made this past week was about the number of deaths during World War II in Russia. It was the 8th of May that the Russians celebrate their veterans and their deaths. Russia is playing a very important part. One of the other things that I've mentioned during the past week was how the power transition model that came to us from the National War College is on track. That is 90 to 95% accurate. There was an article talking about how the German dairy producers are just going forward with their trade to Russia. And I commented in the comment section that this is absolutely what we would expect, that there is no reason for Germany and Russia not to be allies, because as a matter of fact, the United States minus the Federal Reserve is also their ally. When we talk to Betsy Banfield Malone, you will see exactly how indebted we are to her. She's been doing an enormous amount of work. She was the one who showed me the text of the second secret Constitution. I had never known where it was. When people interviewed me, what was the text? I didn't have it, but she's been doing a lot of research. And what I said was that second secret Constitution, it's not in effect. It's rescinded. And where we are now is where our order in the United States is being kept by the National Guard and the Adjutants General. There's been an enormous effort to discredit me because of the things that I'm saying. The network of global corporate control would have you believe lies. So they have people who come on and tell you things that are mostly true, and then they slip in a few false things, hoping that you won't notice what's true and what's false. I've been asked at least 6 times in the last couple of days how I could possibly be telling the truth if I'm not sitting at my desk at the World Bank. The reason I'm not sitting at my desk at the World Bank is the same reason that the United States is doing very stupid, strange things, and that is because of something called state capture. there is a group, a company, that thinks it has the right to dictate to us. It thinks it has the right to charge us interest on country debt, and then it has the right, it thinks, to print currency and bribe politicians and the entire legal profession, except for, I believe, Justice Scalia, is maintaining the fiction that our Constitution of 1789 is in effect. My law school is having a reunion. I'm wondering whether I dare to go there, because I'm not sure that they want to hear what I have to say, but I think they had better listen, because one of the things in the Constitution of 1789 is a 13th Amendment that is in effect, and it says that under a title of nobility, it says that anyone who is subject to a foreign power is not a suitable candidate. This would mean that members of the bar who haven't bothered to figure out whether the courts in the United States are sitting in equity under Article 3 of the Constitution, or whether they're simply admiralty law courts where the judges are being paid by the network of global corporate control. But the fact of the matter is, now that the network of global corporate control is in receivership because of the $2 quadrillion that the network owes us under these bonds, we're the ones that are actually paying the salaries of these officials. And what we're going to have to do during the global currency reset is we're going to have to understand what the actual reality is. And it's going to be a good transition, provided people will sit back and listen to other people and not insist on revenge. That's one of the discussions that's going on. People feel that if somebody has been hoodwinking everyone, they should be punished. They should be criminally liable. But if you realize exactly how many people have been part of this scam, it's unmanageable. We will have to take our time to sort things through, listen to each other, and one of the very serious questions is how we're going to deal with our family members. But actually, the most serious question is how we individually are going to deal with ourselves, because all of us have been caught up in this masquerade, and some of us resist acknowledging that the whole thing was a scam. And it's going to be a wonderful transition once we can get through that scam, because there is a lot of technology that's available that we've not benefited from. There are diseases that we know the cure for. I want to thank you for listening to another segment of the Network of Global Corporate Control. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, the Kennedy brothers, Ferdinand Marcos, Jose Rizal. They've paved the way for the United States minus the Federal Reserve to be just what was intended, a bulwark of stability to prepare the way into a bright future for humanity. Until next week, I'm your host, Karen Hudis.